let me wander. Don't tie my hands, just let me roam. I'm like a bird just crying for space. Give me a brook and some sweet meadow place.
We are so excited to go paint at Palo Duro Canyon.
Yes, you're really going to like it there. It's one of my favorite places.
I hear there's a great museum in the town of Canyon. Can we stop there too?
Why, certainly. That is a museum where you're going to see some of the very best art in Texas.
Let me roam. I'm like a bird just crying for space. Give me a brook and some sweet meadow place. Gone is my craving for the arches. Give me the field and sun on high. So please let me wander the countryside to ponder. A roaming vagabond am I.
Hello and welcome. I'm Stephanie Price, the Marketing Director of the Panhandle Plains Historical Museum. We are so excited to be featuring our art collection here for CASETA. We've been a longtime friend and partner of CASETA, and they always share all of our artworks with their members and the nation, and we could not be more grateful. The Panhandle Plains Historical Museum began its collection journey in 1921 with the vision of a lady named Hattie Anderson. Hattie Anderson had a lot of gumption, and she saw that history was being made around her and there was no one collecting anything. And so she decided to grab like-minded individuals and form the Panhandle Plains Historical Society. Hattie and those individuals braved the Great Depression and were still able to open the doors of the Panhandle Plains Historical Museum in 1933. We are indebted to her legacy and have since expanded the museum just a little bit. Michael Grauer, our former curator and still friend of the Panhandle Plains Historical Museum, is going to talk to you a lot about our wonderful art collection. I want to mention some projects that we're doing coming up. We have a tour with Virtually Anywhere. So live on our website in the middle of May will be this tour. So you can view our art collections and all of our galleries for yourself. Take that 360 tour, click on the hotspots, and enjoy virtually touring the museum. But we hope that you'll make a stop here at Panhandle Plains Historical Museum the next time that you are in Canyon or Amarillo so that you can view our incredible art collections for yourself.
The mural cycle in Pioneer Hall at Panhandle Plains Historical Museum was not originally part of the design, but with President Roosevelt's New Deal art programs, the mural cycle began with the Public Works of Art project in 1934. The original idea came from H.D. Bugbee, who, when he submitted his sketches to John Ankeny in Dallas, which handled Texas and Oklahoma for the Public Works of Art project, Ankeny asked if he could hire an assistant. In this case, it was Emerald artist Ben Carlton Meade. So the first two murals that went in and were installed in 1934 were Bugbee's The Cattleman, which shows Charles Goodnight bringing the first herd of cattle into Palo Duro Canyon in 1876. And Meade's is called Coronado's Coming. It's about Coronado's entrada across the Panhandle Plains region in 1541. The whole plan was to talk about human activity in the Texas Panhandle, like excluding Paleo-Indians. And so the next set of murals went in 1940, and Meade's contribution in this case was the Antelope Creek focused mural, and Bugbee's was ranch headquarters. And so by 1940, 4 of the 8 murals were in place. That was the rest of them were not completed with federal money. No more New Deal compositions in the mural cycle. So the baton was picked back up in 1956, funded by the Panhandle Plains Historical Society, with Ben Carlton Meade's Comancheros and Bugbee's Buffalo Hunt. mural, and therefore the east and west walls were completed by 1956. By that time, Meade had moved to Dallas, and so really said, I'm kind of out of this now. It's too difficult to do this long distance. So Mr. Bugbee painted Kyle hunting buffalo in 1957 on the north wall, and then completed the cycle in 1958 with working cattle on the open range. A couple of little incidental things about the murals is that Coronado, the figure of Coronado in Meade's first mural, is actually Texas artist Granville Bruce, who was his brother-in-law. And then in the Comanchero mural, also by Meade, Meade posed for the Comancheros themselves, and then a neighbor actually posed as Quanah Parker in that mural. In Bugbee's murals, we do know a couple of the Cowboys and ranch headquarters, including Bugbee himself, and J. Evetts Haley, and Jake Chamberlain, a longtime cowboy in Donnelly County. And then in the final mural, Mr. Bugbee used himself as the model 3 times, so he was obviously a very good cowboy because he'd be on 3 different horses at the same time. And then J. Evetts Haley's also present in that mural too. So thus the society felt it was important to complete the mural cycle, and it's really one of the finest you'll find all in Texas. The Gayden Family Gallery of Early Texas Art is something that we started at Panhandle Plains in 1988 when we acquired a Herman Lunkwitz painting at auction at Valley House Gallery in Dallas. We eventually put together what probably is the most comprehensive early Texas art collection in the state in any public institution, largely because there was a scarcity of artists up here in the Texas Panhandle, so people in the region collected Texas art downstate. So the collection really began in 1942 with the James Hamlin gift, which included paintings by Salinas and Jose Harpa and some other artists. And then it was augmented again 20 years later with the Johnny Griffin collection out of Wichita Falls, which concluded more early Texas art. With the passing of Harold Bugbee in '63, and then the acquisition of the Frank Reaugh collection in 1966, the collection numbers about 3,000 objects, give or take, and we finally found a home for it when we designed this space, now called the Gayden Family Gallery of Early Texas Art. We wanted the gallery itself to talk about what Texas was, and hence we have Mexican tile from Saltillo on the floor, and the woodworking actually came from the Herring Mansion in Amarillo, and it helps us better understand how much the cattle industry played in Texas history. So we wanted the gallery space itself to talk about what early Texas art really is. So we eventually put that collection together, adding things over 30-some years onto that acquisition of the Herman Lunkwitz that we purchased at auction, and added from all over the state, from every major school, every major style, every major movement, up to about 1945, because that was always our cutoff date. So we put together a gallery space that I think is reflective of early Texas art in a way that I don't know any other public institution does. And as far as I know, it's the only gallery in the States that's permanently dedicated to early Texas art. So you can look around the room and see probably recognizable styles and artists. Florence McClung, for example, Revo Bassett, Ernest Dozier, Boyer Gonzalez. We also really made a concerted effort to add to our sculpture collection because that was a weak area at the museum in the late 1980s. And so an alley tenant, bronze repoussé, or copper repoussé here, and of course the Charles Umlauf major sculpture there in the center. Pompeo Copini, Mimi Murphy in the back, Octavio Medellin, all different sculptors were added to the collection while we were acquiring two-dimensional works of art. So it's really a great achievement for Panhandle Plains Historical Museum to say that it has the largest and most comprehensive early Texas collection and the only permanent gallery devoted to early Texas art in the state. So we're standing in the Frank Reaugh Gallery, which has actually been part of Panhandle Plains Historical Museum since about 1966, when the trustees of the Frank Reaugh estate dedicated and gifted about 600 works of art to the museum and the society that same year. They also donated about 250 smaller pastels for us to sell in the museum store for the care and feeding of the original core group. So there was a Frank Reaugh gallery from then on here at the Panhandle Plains Historical Museum, and then in the early 1970s, the Panhandle Plains Historical Society worked out a trade with the University of Texas collection to trade some of the smaller pastels here for some of the larger paintings that were held down there since Mr. Reaugh gifted them to the University of Texas in 1938. So to my left here is the approaching herd from 1902. One of his best known large-scale oils. And in the gallery, as you look around the room, you see some of those other larger paintings in pastel and in oil, namely the old Roundup, Watering the Herd, Powder River, and so on, as well as some of the smaller pastels that we're mostly more familiar with in some ways. So I was privileged to be able to ride herd literally on this group of pastels and oil paintings by Mr. Reaugh through most of my career here, and one of the last things that I was honored to be able to do was to transform the gallery space into what it looked a little closer to the way the gallery looked at El Seville in Dallas or Oak Cliff, and the color choices were all based on analysis of different paints that we knew he used and colors that he used, as well as his palette. So it's a terrific way to present his art as best we can that approximates how Mr. Reaugh would like them seen. And so it was something that took place in about 2017 that we were able to transform the gallery into a more appropriate Frank Reaugh type space. So this is the nexus for Frank Reaugh studies, is to come here to not only look at the works of art that are here, but also the tremendous archive that's here, and it formed the basis for the book that I eventually wrote on Mr. Reaugh. So I began visiting the Bugbee Ranch northwest of Clarendon, Texas, and right after I got here in 1987, and Olive Vandriff Bugbee, Harold Bugbee's widow, and I became very good friends, and I spent a lot of weekends down at Bugbee Ranch rooting around in Harold's studio, which was in the basement. However, because of some leakage problems in that basement, I finally convinced Olive to allow us to move the entire studio over to Canyon and install it in the museum on the second floor. And so what you see behind me is a reconstruction of Harold Bugbee's studio, roughly from about 1945 is the target date. We used photographs and Olive's memory about where to place things, but generally when I first saw it in 1987, it was pretty well intact. We did get some of the Navajo saddle blankets off the floor because of that leakage problem, but everything was still in there. So I like to say that we just put a giant hefty bag over the whole thing and hauled it over here to Canyon and set it up. And then we opened it up to the public in 1989, and it was really our first big effort to create a space dedicated to early Texas art. And so the Bugbee Studio has been an immensely popular exhibit for Panhandle Plains Historical Museum since we put it in 1989, to the point where we had to put in an extra step for little critters to be able to look over the ledge and look into the workshop of an artist, which is often an intimidating thing for people, because art is sometimes one of those sort of voodoo things that people don't understand. But you can see in artist's tools, it's a good way to connect to people to art in a more meaningful and substantive way. So the Bugbee Studio has been one of my favorite pet projects that I got to work on, and it was a real honor to be able to handle these objects and place them in such a way that honors Mr. Bugbee. We're standing in the gallery dedicated to the art of H.D. Bugbee, and Mr. Bugbee has had a long association with Panhandle Plains Historical Museum since he painted one of the first murals in Pioneer Hall in 1934. He eventually became Curator of Art in 1951, a position he held until his unfortunate and unexpected passing in 1963. The Bugbees had come at the insistence of their cousin, T.S. Bugbee, one of the pioneer cattlemen of the region, and the Bugbees were part of the original Massachusetts Bay Colony, so they were New England Yankees when they came down here to this part of Texas. Harold practiced his art in the basement studio that he maintained throughout his career here, which really began in 1917 because his mother kept a proper Boston home in the Bugbee Ranch House. When Harold passed, everything passed to his widow, Olive Vandriff Bugbee, and then when she passed in 2003 due to an unfortunate car accident, she'd been volunteering after succeeding him as Curator of Art upon his death. And so when all the art objects became part of the Panhandle Plains Historical Society's collection, we added certain things as we went along, because it included material culture objects as well as Harold's work, as well as examples of Olive Vander's work as a professional artist herself. So in this gallery is a featured exhibition on some of those new acquisitions that came when the Bugbee estate was settled. And so if you look around the gallery today, you'll see examples like the rope corral here, which is a painting we rescued out of the basement and had conserved, along with some studies that were used for the painting. If you look around the room, you'll see examples of his drawings, his watercolors, his illustrated letters, as he really sort of emulated his idol, Charlie Russell. And really, H.D. Bugbee did in Texas what Charlie Russell had done in Montana about 30 years before that. And so Harold Bugbee really and truly took up that baton in this part of Texas, which is the last part that was settled. So in many ways, he's an historic artist as well as one of the most Western artists we produced here in the state. So having this gallery here in one of the most Western museums we have in Texas is an appropriate thing. Study of his work was something I continued while I was here at Panhandle Plains. It resulted in the book H.D. Bugbee Making a Hand, published by Texas A&M University Press in 2019. And so it was a way to encapsulate Mr. Bugbee's dedication to Western things as well as to Texas history in a meaningful way. So the gallery here is very much a reflective of that. One of the more unique relationships the museum had with another entity downstate was with the Copini Academy of Fine Arts in San Antonio, which resulted in a number of objects that were made by Pompeo Copini as well as his protege Waldine Tauch. And one of those, of course, is the Triumph of Peace, this high relief that stands at the entrance to the art galleries coming off the petroleum ring here at Panhandle Plains Historical Museum. And it's really a way to introduce people inform people that they're walking into a new space and a new area that's devoted to art objects. And this high relief talks about the fact that our arts only triumph in times of peace, especially with the left panel, which shows the 5 arts. And then, of course, the Roman god of war in the center panel, and of course, receiving the palm, the symbol of peace, in the right panel. So it's really a nice way to show off that Copini-Tauch relationship that really was cultivated under a longtime museum director, C. Boone McClure. So it's really a nice way to introduce people to the early Texas art collection when they come from other parts of the museum.
When stars collide, new worlds fill the sky, and something old is new again. Our love will fly on brand new wings, will glide like bending time, will change the view to bright life colors, all but blue. We'll hang new stars as something old is new.